Batman Caped Crusader. We're going in. Yes, it's Batman Caped Crusader, not Batman the Caped Crusader. That was a video game from 1988. There is some interesting history leading up to this series overall and to this episode in particular. The episode we're going to be looking at is already a plethora of references and cameos and reimaginings. Does it all come together? Let's take a look. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics, and we've got quotes. Batman Caped Crusader had a long development, starting off life at Warner Brothers to be commissioned for its streaming service, Max, time of recording, the name keeps changing. However, it was passed upon, sold, and eventually picked up by Amazon, so it would be finished and end up airing for Prime. The key developer is Bruce Timm, one of the creators of the seminal Batman the Animated Series of the 90s, and initially, when approached to do more Batman, he was reluctant. He stated, they said, hey, how would you feel about going back and making some more BTAS episodes? And I'm like, nah, we'd been there, we'd done that. I wasn't interested in just revisiting that world. He became more sold when discussing it with James Tucker, who would become the executive producer for Caped Crusader as well. He stated, and Tim paraphrases, well, if you didn't want to do another BTAS straight up, wasn't there some things that you didn't get to do back in the day that you would have liked to have done? Tim went on to discuss how his initial plans for BTAS had been more pulpy and grim, but had changed once it was sold. Tim stated, the more we started talking about it, it was like, okay, that's interesting, and then we got really excited about it. So the idea to remake BTAS, but as he would have liked it to have been, is baked into the inception of Caped Crusader. So even when one is regarding Caped Crusader as its own entity, its own show, which it is because it does pull from other sources as well, that element is a core piece. So the comparisons that may arise, or some may seek out, or some may feel are intrinsic, they're part of it. Now, seeing as how these discussions are recalled by Tim and Tucker as taking place in 2020, there were of course years between these discussions and the development of the show, so there were some things that did change, were added, but that element did remain. Even if more Dark Age comic elements, shadow elements, and GCPD series elements would be incorporated. Tim stated of this Batman, many things, but we're just gonna go with this one for now. It's not year one, it's more like week 2. Now, because part of the goal was to reimagine elements of Batman the Animated Series, or rescue ideas and concepts that couldn't be used there, that led into some of the decisions about which characters were used. Enter Nocturna. Nocturna was meant to feature in a BTAS episode. There's even an old character design by Tim that's been floating around online for years. She's also a character we've talked about on this channel. The original Nocturna debuted in Detective Comics 529 in the year 1983, placing her near the end of the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age was an era that BTAS liked to mine for story concepts. Now, the original Nocturna was not a vampire, even though she did look like one. She had been in a radioactive laser accident that had drained her skin of pigment and made her sensitive to light, hence the vampire look. She was one of those villains with a yearning for Batman. But she was also a Bruce Wayne love interest in that she was trying to get with Bruce Wayne for his money, because Nocturna's whole thing was that she wanted nice things and to live a nice life, and she would steal to get it. In this endeavor, she went so far as trying to adopt Jason Todd. This would then force her and Bruce to be together. It went places. This was OG Jason Todd, not stealing tires off of the Batmobile Jason Todd. That was post-crisis. Pre-crisis, he was more of a Dick Grayson clone, aside from the hair, and of course being named Jason. Now, Nocturna's post-crisis version would eventually be a vampire, but that didn't happen until after the proposed BTAS episode. So it's not quite clear outside of aesthetics why they decided to make her a vampire. Some postulate that she was confused with the character of Dala, but as stated, it was likely that she just already looked like one, and it wasn't a big leap because she was already sensitive to light. The BTAS episode would have seen Batman turn into a vampire. This because of Nocturna, and then he would have had to cure himself and fight her. The episode didn't pass the censors for a few reasons. It seems to be a combination of blood, because they would have had to show blood, and there was a no blood thing going on at the time. Also some of the sensuality that would have been baked into the episode, because there can be a bit of a sexual thing when it comes to vampires drinking blood, depending on how you depict it, but it's often there in the subtext. Now, Tim states it was vetoed because he was told no vampires, period. And since that was the whole concept around which the episode was based, it was scrapped. But that design was out there, and if one was in the deep lore of Batman TAS and the behind the scenes, one was most likely aware of the idea that there was a Nocturna episode. It was canceled. So when the villains trailer revealed that Caped Crusader would feature Nocturna, many were curious. This was the chance for the long forgotten Nocturna episode. What would it be like? What would it look like in this universe? And the answer is, outside from some deep cuts and a couple of standout moments, fairly standard. The episode Nocturne, which is the one Nocturna debuts in, appropriately. That is the 8th episode of the first season of the Caped Crusader, which has a total of 10 episodes. It was written by Haley Gross and directed by Matt Peters. Like all the episodes of season 1, it aired on August 1st of 2024. While this is the 8th episode, this series is a mix of episodic and sequential storytelling. So while there are some arcs in progress, one can watch this without being lost. Bruce is less on an arc and more on a series of set pieces, snapshots showing how Batman is a trauma response and he's still learning how to human and deal with it. As a result, for the most of the series, series, he's very cold. He'll have moments, but then he'll go back to base, culminating in one large moment at the end of the series. But as mentioned, it feels less like a curve and more like a series of stops. This episode is arguably his warmest outing, showcasing his care of children, the first glimpse of a non-vengeance-filled, selfish look at his mission. So for those who prefer more balanced Bruce, this episode has that. Harvey Dent is of course on a path to Two-Face. His trajectory is clear. He's being threatened by the mob, he's now in their pockets even though he doesn't want to be. So for those who are up on their Two-Face history, they know that he's very close to acid in the face. Those are the two ongoing elements to be aware of in this episode. Outside of that, it's Monster of the Week, so it's an easy episode to jump into. This episode opens with references. We see two boys at an orphanage, Dickie and Jace, sneaking out to get a look at the carnival. Dickie is clearly meant to be Dick Grayson. He's drawn in a golden age style, a la Bob Kane or Bob Kane's Ghost Artists, or Dick Sprang. Jace is meant to be Jason Todd, with his original hair color. A bit more vibrant than it was in some of those early comic panels, but the same. These are the first two Robins, and they encounter Nocturna as a child. She's not really called that in the episode, but we know she's called that, or fans may know if they know the history. Because she is a child, this means no Batman or Bruce and Nocturna romance subplot. Instead, in this, Nocturna is an energy vampire, who is being used as part of the spectacle in the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari style show run by her brother, with hints of young Frankenstein. This at the carnival. Her energy vampirism is presented as a mysterious ailment, so a bit of a fusion of her comic concepts. Her brother is allegedly seeking a cure for this. Her brother is Anton Knight, and this positions her as the first Nocturna, Natalia Knight, because there have been different last names. In those stories, Anton was her adopted brother, who she didn't meet for years as he was significantly older than her. So they meet as adults and strangers. There is also a romantic layer to their relationship in the comics. He's very much wrapped around Nocturna's finger. He was a criminal, also known as the Night Slayer, or Thief of the Night. But why would you ever call yourself that when you could call yourself the Night Slayer? Natalia did decide to work with him after her accident, and together they ran a theft ring. Anton was very loyal to Nocturna, seemingly because he was in love with her. This episode does add a bit more to their ties. It plays more upon their familiar relationships. He feels a bit more like a guardian. She feels a bit more like an unruly child. They ditched the romance entirely, thankfully, given the change in context. Even though they don't go into it, there are also clear reasons why they need to stick together. He's offering her protection. She's part of his financial success. He's also offering her a cure. There's also the imbalance in their relationship in that she is stronger than him after she's drained energy. She's kind of like a little Wednesday Addams parasite. Making her a child also adds a layer of sympathy to the proceedings. It's also most likely meant to make the fact that she's preying upon children come across as less eerie or icky. It's also meant to harken to the idea that she's young and out of control, but it also adds a sympathy and empathy layer for Bruce, a reason for him to feel a bit more soft towards her compared to other criminals, because we've seen with others that he's just very cold. But this episode will go out of its way to establish that he has a soft spot for children, particularly those who are lost, be that actually or emotionally. After the intro, the action takes place over a night at the carnival, where a charity event is being hosted for orphans, whose guardian is Dr. Leslie Tompkins, a now staple Bat character who debuted in Detective Comics 457 in 1976. She has ties to Bruce's father, and hence to Bruce as a child, and then was also someone who helped the underprivileged of Gotham. So her characterization in this episode is entirely in keeping with her comic history. This episode really is a great one on the Bruce Wayne front and showing that there is a Bruce Wayne in there.
Bruce is the orphanage's most generous donor.
Really? Hell of a tax write-off.
You're not fooling anyone here, Buster.
It is rough on the orphan front. Nocturna is using her brother's show, and hence the carnival, to lure out victims. So after she's part of the show, Jason seeks her out because Dick went with her but didn't come back. So she promises that she'll take Jace to Dickie, only it's a trap, and she reveals her hunger.
Natalia!
Some feel this sequence is a nod to when Nocturna sought to adopt Jason. Others feel it's just incidental. What do you think? Now, despite promising her brother she won't drain any more people, she of course does, she doesn't have to at this point. They don't go into that, but she's just doing it. She's out of control. And who does she seek out? More Robins. When Nocturna first returned in comics, she was a villain for Robin, but specifically Tim Drake. Perhaps this is a nod to that. Minus Tim Drake.
Mr. Dent, one of my kids is missing. Steffi, she...
It's a carnival. Kids run around.
First, Stephanie Brown, the fourth Robin. And by this point, Leslie Tompkins is aware children are missing, but not many people really seem to care. Bruce is one of the people who does. He even ditches his date to go look. His date is Julie Madison, his Golden Age love interest and his first significant one. She was introduced in Detective Comics 31 in 1939 as his fiancée, in the story Batman vs. the Vampire Part 1. So it was a vampire issue, which makes her appearance here in this episode even more appropriate. Batman would follow that mad monk to Hungary to stake him. Dedication. Julie only appeared 5 times during the Golden Age, one of which was the first Clayface appearance, so it was a bit of a shame not to see her in the Clayface episode, which shared so many plot elements. In the second Clayface appearance, which she also featured in, she dressed as a decoy Robin. Some feel that this means she should be added to the Robin count of this episode, but mileage may vary. By her last appearance in Detective Comics 49, she broke up with Bruce because she thought he was an ambitiousless wastrel who didn't want to make anything of his life. Now, Bruce's attempts to find Stephanie do not go well. He seems very suspicious, running around looking for this little girl.
I'm sorry, I'll pay for it. Have you seen 2 girls around here? One has a blonde ponytail, the other...
Why are you looking for 2 little girls?
He gets beat up by the carnival folk, one of whom is named Waylon and is clearly Killer Croc. Maybe in this universe he gets to live his best life among his friends. No crime for him. Wouldn't that be nice? Nicer than what's happening to the orphans. Nocturna's hunger grows, and she hurts her brother when he confronts her, unbeknownst to her, fatally.
I can't feel my legs.
She then sets out for another victim. How about another Robin? This time it's Carrie Kelly. Many fans may know Carrie Kelly from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. She is the one Robin who is able to fight off Nocturna at least a little bit until Batman gets there, because by this point he's woken up from his beating, recovered, Julie left, and so now he's Batman. The ending of this story for Nocturna is the high point. It starts when she learns her brother is dead.
Anton's dead, Natalia.
What?
You killed him.
Rather than let her die, because when the sun comes up, it's starting to burn her and she will just burn to a crisp, which is something that she claims she wants, and Carrie also wants, which is appropriate given the universe she originally hails from. That's probably just a little nod for those who are familiar with the darkness of The Dark Knight Returns. Bruce spares her and is kind and gentle with her.
Just go! Leave me alone!
I can't.
And if one has been watching all the episodes in sequence, it's a showing that Bruce is far more human than he lets others see. Now, if one has been watching in sequence and just jumped in or just watched this episode for whatever reason, it does just feel like he's more in line with other more typical depictions of Batman. Not all of them, but the ones some may think of if they're familiar with the history of this show or they're just looking at the art style would be Batman the Animated Series. And in that, Bruce is very human. He still has his trauma and his moments, but he's further along on his journey than this Batman is. This, however, solid moment. There's also a little nice detail of how Carrie grabs onto his cape. It's just showing that he's not as scary as he seems to criminals. It's a subtle touch, but appreciated. Nocturna is taken for observation. The Robins all recover. And Bruce is left to count all the orphans he could adopt. I'm kidding. This Batman isn't ready for any orphans now or maybe ever if you look at some of the executive producers on this show. Some have suggested that maybe they're leading up to, or it would be fun to have these Robins all be a kind of investigative group like the Baker Street Boys. There are some rumors that maybe that's something that executive producer Matt Reeves, who did the Batman, even wants to do in the future. Rumors, rumors. What do you think? Do you like that idea? The episode's conclusion is that Harvey grows a conscience and then he gets acid thrown in his face because he doesn't bow to the mob. Harvey's been going through a bit of a reverse morality arc in this. But that is a story for another day. The end. There was nowhere else for this other thing I noticed to go, so I'll just put it here. That reporter looks like the Fleischer Superman cartoon's Lois Lane, and it's not the only time she's appeared in this series. Also, hi Jimmy Olsen. Fleischer produced a series of Superman cartoons in the 1940s. If that is Lois, nice nod. Why not reporting the news in Metropolis? Is it boring? Is Superman not there yet? Is there no one handsome enough to report on? Just Bruce. Overall, this episode was solid, but nothing out of the ordinary. It's not especially standout for Nocturna in any way. It's very standard as far as vampire plots go. People picked off one by one. Nocturna, while arguably more well-rounded out than her comic I Want Nice Things counterpart, is also not that deep. Her strongest moments come in her interactions with Batman, and those are very strong. Otherwise, she's just walking around consuming children, not even out of desperation, but more for fun it seems at points. But they don't lean in either direction. It's fairly surface for her until those end moments. There are lots of little nods and Easter eggs for comic fans, and I'm sure I may have missed some, and if I did, please put them down below. This episode and series overall is also intellectually interesting in the fact that you get to see how all these different concepts from different eras are brought together by all these different creators, some of whom you can really see their stamps at certain moments. This episode, as mentioned, does some decent emotional work for Bruce and Harvey. Overall, while everything in this episode is competent, entertaining, and there's plenty to examine, it just feels like it lacks a little bit of heart, at least in my opinion. You can let me know what you think. For those hoping for something closer to the comics, this may not have been what they anticipated. However, the show was advertised as presenting reimaginings, so ultimately it's unsurprising that changes were made. But now we've gotten to see a version of a Nocturna episode. It's out there. It's certainly different in concept from the original, but it works well for this series, and the carnival provides a decent setting. And of course, that means we got a fun house mirror scene. You have a carnival? Go in the mirror house. It's the law. Now, all of these are just my thoughts. I want to hear yours. I know there are a lot of thoughts and feelings about this show, alongside a healthy dose of ambivalence, and I want to hear it all. What do you think of this episode on its own, as it sits inside the Caped Crusader series? What do you think of Nocturna? What do you think of this Batman? How do you feel about all the references? Do they feel relevant, or do they feel like they're just there? I want to hear all of your thoughts. Please put them down below while you're down there. Please do all the YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe. Hit that bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking some time to discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.